Okay, good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshas Emor, Tavshin Pei. And before we begin, our learning should be a merit for refuah shleima for all those who are ill. And merit that Hashem should rescue us from this very difficult situation of COVID-19 that we find ourselves in. So, in this week's Parsha, the Parsha begins. The Torah forbids a Kohen from becoming tamei, ritually impure, through contact with a dead body. However, if it means becoming tamei to show final respects for mother, father, wife, son, daughter, brother, unmarried sister, then a kohen is permitted to do so. Then the Torah says, this is Paragraph Aleph, Pasuk, chapter 21, verse 5, Likrachu karcha beroisham, they shall not make a bald spot in their head. The corner of their beards they shall not shave. And in their flesh they shall not make an incision. Rashi tells us that the first and third parts of the pasuk that say not to make a bald spot, not to make an incision, is talking about a case where one does so to express mourning over the loss of a loved one. There was such a practice of making a bald spot and of actually cutting oneself to mourn over the loss. And the Torah forbids that to be done. Now, in the context of the Psukim, it would seem the Torah is forbidding that to a Kohen to do. The truth is, we know elsewhere in the Torah, in the book of Devarim, the Torah forbids doing this, again, making a bald spot or making an incision over the death of a loved one, says it for everyone. The Sefornu, in his commentary, points out, gives an explanation to the flow of the verses here at this point, and points out something very important about this prohibition. So he says that although the Torah tells a Kohen that although typically he cannot become tamei, ritually impure, through contact with a dead body, going into the cemetery, being under the same roof as a dead body, for a close relative, he may do so. Nonetheless, although for a close relative he may do so, he may become tamei, to excessively mourn over the loss of a loved one, that he may not do. The Sefornu says that these acts of making a bald spot and cutting oneself to express mourning over the loss of a loved one is called excessive mourning, and that is what the Torah is forbidding. The Torah, of course, wants us to mourn, obligates us to mourn, but to a point. And there is a point where it's considered, where the Torah considers that it goes overboard, and it may not be done. And that's what this prohibition is, of not to make the bald spot and not to cut oneself. But the question still remains, why does the Torah have to say this prohibition once in a context that seems to be speaking only to Kohanim, and another place to everyone? So I'm going to share with you the commentary of the Kli Yakar, his Talmudic type answer to this question. And he says, if the Torah would only have said the general prohibition, which would have been a prohibition to everyone, or would seem to have been a prohibition to everyone, one might have thought that the exception would be a Kohen. The Kohen is a very, very important member of the Jewish people. The Kohen does the service in the temple. And therefore, one might have thought, without an explicit or without the Torah mentioning this prohibition of excessive mourning next to by the Kohanim, then one might have thought that it doesn't apply to the Kohanim. Because for a Kohen, the loss of a Kohen, for that, it would be appropriate to excessively mourn. Therefore, the Torah here, when it told us the laws by the Kohanim, how they may mourn for a loved one, the Torah says by the Kohanim, they may not do this type of excessive mourning. And if the Torah would have just told us the prohibition of excessive mourning by a Kohen and not mentioned anywhere else, we couldn't have derived it from a Kohen to the rest of the Jewish people. And that would be because, as the Kliyakar, an interesting idea, is that part of the process when we mourn, our mourning is actually an expression of feeling the pain of what the soul may be going through. A soul, when it departs from the body, goes through judgment. You can get a very serious judgment. And our mourning is an expression of our feeling the pain of what that soul is going through. And one might have thought that the Torah, when the Torah says by a Kohen not to show excessive mourning, that's because by a Kohen, a holy Kohen who works in the Beis HaMikdash, good chance he's got a straight path to the Garden of Eden. There's no reason to excessively mourn. But others who aren't on that same holy level as a Kohen, who may be going through much more difficult, the soul may be going through much more of a difficult step, maybe going through a very difficult state. Maybe there we may excessively mourn to show our pain, to feel the pain of what the soul may be going through. And therefore the Torah also, besides saying this prohibition by a Kohen, said it by everyone that one may not do this excessive form of mourning, which is to make a bald spot or to cut oneself as an expression of mourning for the death of a loved one. Now, I want to share with you a very interesting thought that I saw brought down from Ramban Nachmanides regarding death in general, which is part of which is a subject in this week's Parsha. Ramban Nachmanides wrote a work called Teras HaAdam, which means the law of the man. And part of that, he discusses the laws of mourning. And he also discusses a facet or perspectives on death. And the Ramban asks the following question. When someone passes away, we feel a terrible loss. And the Ramban asks, why? We know it's coming. It happens to everyone. No one lives forever. Logically, everybody knows it's going to happen. So if you know it's going to happen, so why do we mourn so much? Why do we mourn as if this person should have just kept on living? No one can do that. It's not possible. God decreed death upon the world. So we know it's going to happen. It's not a surprise necessarily. So why do we mourn so much? Says the Ramban, an unbelievable idea. And that idea is that when the first human being was created, Adam Arishan, he was supposed to live forever. Which means that when he was created, his nature, his essence was an essence that is one that expects to live eternally. That's what his essence is. That's how he was created. He was created to be an eternal being, to be immortal. And therefore, it's part of his nature to reflect mortality. But Adam Arishan sinned and brought a punishment of death upon the world. So now man has to die, but it doesn't change his essence, doesn't change that nature within him that expects to live to be immortal, because that's the man was created. And therefore, although logically we know that everyone eventually has to pass away, we still have that emotional reaction when someone passes away but they're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to stay forever, because that's what man is. Isn't man supposed to be forever? Because the first man was created to be immortal, the nature of man, the essence of man is to expect immortality. And therefore, when death occurs, we're shattered, we're broken, because it goes against the way we were created. So it's a very interesting idea. Now, I want to go to a different part of the Parsha. And this is Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Chav Gimel, chapter 23, verse 23. And when you harvest the harvest of your land, you shall not destroy or cut down the corner of your field as you harvest, which is the obligation that is called payah. When harvesting a field, you have to leave a corner of the field, a part of the field, for the poor to come and take it for themselves. You also shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest. That means when you harvest the grain, and you pick it up to collect it, you have certain gleanings, certain stalks that fall to the ground. And depending on how many stalks fall, won't get into all the halachas about it, all the laws about it, but that's called leket. gleanings, what fell down from what you were gathering, you're not allowed to gather it. You leave them for the needy. I am Hashem your God. So we have here two forms of matnas hanim, two forms of gifts that we give to the poor, where we don't give them that gifts. We talk about tzedakah, charity. That's something that we give to them. There's something called meiser ani. There's a tenth of the new produce that certain year is a tenth of, after separating other parts, goes to the poor. That is something that we give to them. But here we have gifts to the poor that we don't gift them directly. We leave it in the field for them to take. And I saw a interesting point being made of this. And that is that the fact that there are times where the Torah tells us not to directly give the poor man what he needs, but rather let him come get it, is coming to teach us a facet of tzedakah, a facet of charity that has to do with being sensitive to the poor man. Every person wants to be self-sufficient. That's the nature of a human being, is to take care of themselves. And if, God forbid, a person comes to a situation where they have to ask others, it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult. It's very hurtful to their self-esteem. It's very embarrassing. And therefore, the Torah here, by telling us to leave certain things for the poor man to come get, is introducing us a concept that when we can, we should try to do our best to allow the poor man to receive what he needs from us in a way that's less embarrassing, in a way that's less hurtful to him. Actually, we can say that when you leave part of the field you leave it uncut, and the ani comes and cuts it, that perhaps to some degree that makes him feel that he's done something for it, although he knows he's coming on to others for his needs. But here, he did it. He did some work. He worked to be able to sustain himself, and that makes him feel better. Even when he comes back to the field and he collects what's falling, it's his involvement. It's his work. And that gives him a certain degree of comfort that he's done something to sustain himself. So the Torah is introducing that by the Torah telling us that certain things that we are to give to the poor, we don't give it to them. We leave it for them to come take. It's introducing to us the concept that we should, when possible, to allow the poor man to receive what he needs from us in a way that is less hurtful and less embarrassing to him. And with this, I'd like to share with you something that many of you may have seen, but I'd like to go through it with you. And that is the Rambam's 8 levels of tzedakah, the 8 levels of charity. The Rambam, in his work Yad HaChazaka, which is his code of Jewish law, has a section called Hilchos Matnes Aniyim, the laws of the gifts to the poor. And in the last chapter, he devotes a number of paragraphs to what he calls Shmeina Malis Yesh B'Tzedakah Zu L'Mayla Mizu. There are 8 levels of charity, one higher than the other. Ma'ala Gedayla She'ein L'Mayla Mimena, the highest level of charity, of tzedakah. Zahamachzik Riyad Yisrael Shemach, that's when you strengthen a fellow Jew who's falling. That means he is in trouble. He hasn't yet come to the point that he has to ask people, but he's on the verge of it. And you come and you put him back on his feet. How do you do that? You may give him a gift, and with that money, he's able to reestablish himself. You give him a loan, if that's what he wants. Make a partnership with him. Find him a job. So that you can strengthen him, you can put him back on his feet, that he doesn't come to ask other people. That is the highest level of tzedakah. The highest level of tzedakah is to help someone not have to come and ask others for help. To do something, he knows he's coming to help for you, right? You're helping him. The Rambam says, give him a gift. So he knows he's getting something from you. But that's worth it if at the end he can be self-sufficient and not have to go around to others. Taking help from one person and now becoming self-sufficient again, that's the greatest thing that you can do for a person. Emotionally, that's the greatest thing you can do for him. To put him back on his feet, protect his self-esteem, let him be self-sufficient, let him feel good about himself. That's the highest level of tzedakah. Highest level of tzedakah. There is a book called The Tzedakah Treasury, written by Rabbi Avraham Chaim Foyer, may he be well. And he brings the following. He brings, the Sefer Hasidim writes that an excellent form of charity is when the poor man attempts to sell an article that no one wants to buy, but the rich man nevertheless purchases it from him. That is a supreme act of charity because the pauper does not feel that he has received alms. So he's selling things. He thinks, or he's hoping somebody's going to buy it. No one's buying it. So what do? You buy his stuff from him. You don't need his stuff. You're basically putting out money for him, but you're making him feel like a mensch. You're making him feel self-sufficient. You're making him feel that he can take care of himself. That is the highest form of charity. And then he brings out a beautiful story. There was once a rabbi known Rabbi Yeshaya Muscat of Prague. Say what was a great Baltzduck, a very charitable person. And the story goes of a blind pauper who came to Prague and made an effort to support himself by selling cakes and cookies. The blind man set up his humble business right next to the home of Rabbi Yeshaya, where he sat all day with a basket full of baked goods and hawked his wares to every passerby. The blind man's situation was miserable indeed because he sat all day in every kind of weather exposed to the elements. In addition, such peddling was illegal, and the blind man was constantly filled with fear that the authorities would harass or even arrest him. Sure enough, one day, a policeman caught him and confiscated all of his merchandise. The blind man wailed bitterly over his misfortune. Rabbi Yeshaya Muscat heard his heartrending cries. The kind-hearted rabbi gave the blind pauper enough money to cover his loss. From then on, Rabbi Yeshaya would wait for the blind man every morning. The minute he set up his little stand, Rabbi Yeshaya would come by and purchase all his wares. The neighbors saw what was going on and asked Rabbi Yeshaya, "We see that you're supporting the blind man single-handedly. So why don't you just give the pauper one lump sum, a monthly stipend, and save him from the burden of dragging his basket and setting up his stall every morning, and save yourself the effort of going through this daily charade?" Good question, huh? Rabbi Yeshaya firmly rejected the proposal. Don't you see how much pride the blind man takes in this in his enterprise? Don't you see how he considers himself to be a successful businessman and not a helpless beggar? If this poor man's eyesight has been taken away from him, shall we also take away from him his self-respect and sense of accomplishment? This story beautifully illustrates this concept. The greatest form of tzedakah is to make a person feel self-sufficient. So that's the highest level. Next level, writes the Rambam, Pachas mizeh, a step down. The giver knows who he's giving to. But the poor man doesn't know from whom he got it. There were great sages who would secretly go and throw money by the door of the poor. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. I'm sorry, I skipped a level. I knew something that's not right. I have to back up. Sorry. Pachas mizeh, hanais and tzedakah laniyim. Less than this is one who gives charity to the poor. Lo yada lamina san, he doesn't know who he's giving to. Lo yeda anim milakach, the poor man doesn't know from whom he's taking. Says the Rambam, what's the advantage to this? Sharei zoi mitzvah lishma. This is a mitzvah for its own sake. This is a mitzvah without ulterior motives. At the end of the day, if you know, if the giver, if the donor knows who the recipient is, then in the back of his mind, he could say, you know what, one day he'll pay me back. One day I may need him and he'll have to pay me back. That is what can go through a person's mind. If you know who you helped, in the back of your mind, you may say to yourself, one day he may pay me back. And therefore, if you don't know who you're giving to, it's a mitzvah lishma, completely sincere. There's no ulterior motives. You don't know who the guy is. You can never ask him back for a favor. Also, he doesn't know who he got the money from, so he never has to feel embarrassed. He never has to walk in the street and know that he got the money from a certain person and feel beholden to him. That's also something. Gratitude is important, but at the same time, a certain feeling of beholden, especially a poor man who doesn't have much, and he feels beholden to another person, that's very difficult. So if he doesn't know who he's getting money from, he's good. So in this case, both sides gain. And the Rambam says that we find such a thing in the Beis Hamikdash. In the Beis Hamikdash, there was a chamber called Lishkas Chashoyim, the chamber of the discreet, the chamber of the secretive. Shoyat Tzadikim Noistim Baba Chashoy. The righteous would put money there quietly. And the poor would again quietly, no one sees, no one knows, would go there and take money to support themselves. The Rambam says the closest thing to this is what we have, which he calls kupa shel tzedakah, which worked the same way. There was someone in charge of this charity box. Without anybody seeing or knowing, people would put in. Without seeing or knowing, people would take, other than the person in charge. So again, there's a person in charge, but the giver doesn't see the recipient doesn't see the donor. At least you have that much. And the Rambam says that would be the closest thing to this, but only put your money into such a pushka, such a charity box, if you know the person in charge is trustworthy, Rambam says. All right. So second level was you don't know who you're giving to, the recipient doesn't know who he's getting from. Pachas mizeh, the next level, the giver knows who he's giving to, poor man does, the recipient doesn't know who he's getting from. You find in the Gemara stories of great sages who basically secretly go up to a poor man's house, throw the money there, run away. So when the poor man would see the money, he wouldn't know who he's receiving from. All right, so the poor man doesn't know who he's receiving from. He's not facing the person. He never has to feel beholden to the person. You know who you gave to, so you're losing out on that advantage. But more important is the fact that the poor man doesn't feel hurt. Pachas mizeh, the next level below that, the giver doesn't know, but the poor man does know. There used to be these great sages who would basically have money hanging from the back of their coats. So when the poor would take it off from the coats, the poor knew who they were getting it from, but the giver didn't know who he was giving it to. So again, this helps the poor man in a certain level not to have to face the poor man directly, the rich man directly. The rich man never sees the poor man, that the poor man should feel, oh, he this is the person, he knows that he gave me, money. And therefore it has an advantage. So although again, the poor man, he doesn't know who he's receiving it from, that creates a discomfort for him, but at least he's not face to face dealing with the giver, which we had in the case before. And he's not going to feel in any way that some way he'll get paid back. The poor man knows who he's getting from. He may feel beholden, but at the same time, he doesn't have to face deal with this person. Okay. Next. Okay, so that was a level. That was a level of where the poor man knows who he's taking from, but the giver doesn't know. Pachas mizeh. Next level is where, okay, the giver is giving directly to the poor man is getting directly, but the giver gave it before the poor man asked. Asking is very difficult. It's very embarrassing. So even though there'll be a certain embarrassment to the poor man because he's directly getting from the rich man, and it's a certain embarrassment just dealing directly with a person and feeling beholden, nonetheless, at least he didn't have to ask. Pachas mizeh, lower than that, to give him after he asked. Okay, he gave it to him after he asked. But as we'll see from the next level, but you gave him generously. You gave him a nice gift. Pachas mizeh, a lower level lower than that. Sheyitin like pachas min aroi b'sever panim yafais. The giver gives less than appropriate, which means he doesn't give him much because he doesn't have much. Nonetheless, he gives it the saver panim yafais. He gives it with a pleasant expression on his face. He shows the poor man that he wants to help him. This is all he can do, but he wants to help. And he makes the poor man feel comfortable, tries to comfort him, tries to encourage him, tries to make him feel good about himself. So although he's not giving him much, nonetheless, he's giving it to him. He's giving to him with a cheerful expression. And the lowest level is to give it to him sadly. Now, from the way Rabbi Foyer writes in the Tzedakah Treasury, when it says he gives them sadly, it doesn't mean he's showing him how much he really doesn't want to give him the money, but he's giving it to him anyway. Here, get away. That's not what he's doing, because Rabbi Foyer writes that if the giver openly expresses his annoyance and dislike of giving, he loses the entire merit of tzedakah, even if it's a large donation. You may give the person a lot of money, but if you show him that you are not pleased with what you're doing, then you lose the merit of that tzedakah. So when the Rambam says that the lowest level of tzedakah is to give it to him be'etzev, that means he doesn't give it to him expressing in a cheerful way. He gives it to him stoically, straight face, no expression. I'm not telling you I'm happy. I'm not telling you I'm sad. I'm just giving you the money. In that situation, the poor man isn't made to feel bad about the tzedakah that he's receiving, and therefore the matter of tzedakah is still there. But if the giver openly shows that he dislikes giving, he really doesn't want to give him the money, then if he makes the poor man feel that bad, then he's lost the merit of the tzedakah. And this is, as we said, what is being expressed when the Torah tells us to leave things for the poor man. Give him what he needs in the way that could be most comfortable and least embarrassing. Okay. Now I want to share with you one last thought on this pasuk that talks about where it says, when you harvest your land, leave the corner of the field, don't collect the gleanings, leave it for the needy. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Hashem your God. Now, this pasuk comes at a very strange point. It starts off, the psukim that precede are the parts of Parshas Emor that deal with the Moadim, deal with the Yom Tovim. We read this section on Yontif. It starts off with Pesach, and it talks about the Omer and Shavuos. After Shavuos, it interjects this verse. And when you harvest, which is Shavuos time, and when you harvest, leave the payah for the poor, don't collect the gleanings, I am Hashem your God. And the next thing is back to the holidays, Rosh Hashanah. Why in the middle of the holidays? Why after Shavuos? Now again, Shavuos time is when you do this, but what's it doing here? What is this reminder of this mitzvah doing here in the middle of the discussion of the holidays? Says the Meshech Chachma. It's not in this week's Parsha. I believe it's in Parshas Yisrael. The Meshech Chachma, and I have it quoted here, Meshech Chachma says like this, that when we celebrate Matan Torah and Shavuos, when we celebrate the giving of the Torah at Sinai and Shavuos, he says, no, that it's not just a celebration about chukim. It's not just a celebration about mitzvahs that we wouldn't have known on our own. The mitzvahs that we received at Sinai and the mitzvahs that we celebrate for on Shavuos, for receiving them on Shavuos, are the mitzvahs that are nimusim muskalim, logical, humanistic behavior, like being kind to a needy person. Every basic human being has feelings of mercy for someone else in need. It's a basic human feeling. It's basic human decency. That's something that we would say, we see other cultures have it without the Torah. And one might think the Torah is not really coming for that. And on Shavuos, we are supposed to know that it's not that way. That any mitzvah we do, even those mitzvahs that we think are basic human decency, and every decent human being should know to do and would do it, that's a mistake. It has to be done because if you're not doing it based on your belief in Hashem, it is possible that a person will turn from an intellectual human being to one who seems to have these humanistic beliefs and turn into a wild animal. Therefore, says the Meshech Chochmah, going to our parsha now, and therefore, following Shavuos in Parshas Emor, to interjects, leaving for the poor. The pasuk says, and when you harvest, don't leave the payah, leave the gleanings. I am Hashem your God. What are those last three words? What are they coming in to say? Says the Meshech Chochmah, those three words in Hashem Elokeichem are saying, you know why you're leaving this for the poor? Because I am Hashem your God, because I am Hashem told you to do it. Of course, you should do it with the understanding of feeling for the poor. But the basis of why you're doing it, because I told you. Because if you don't do it because of that basis, then you may stop doing it, and you can turn into doing worse. And therefore, it follows Shavuos. After mentioning Shavuos, the Torah reminds us about this mitzvah because it's trying to tell us that Shavuos is about this mitzvah too. Shavuos is not just about the mitzvahs we didn't know on our own. Shavuos is about this mitzvah that every culture seemingly understands that we should be have basic human decency. You cannot rely on that. You cannot practice those things just based on human decency. You have to do it because Shavuos gave it to us. And as the pasuk says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. If you do it because of your belief in Hashem, then it'll last. Otherwise, the most cultured people can turn into wild animals. And we as Jews, unfortunately, know that all too well. I want to share with you a story that Rabbi Mordechai Kamenetsky writes in his Parsha Parables that illustrates this beautifully. In an attempt to conceal both the atrocities and the prisoners from the Allies, the Nazis instituted the infamous Death March in the final days of World War II, removing prisoners from concentration camps in Poland and marching them to death camps in Germany. Elimelech Kindler was amongst them. Elimelech pleaded for a few minutes of rest during the fatal trek, promising that after 2 minutes of repose, he would catch up to the group. Miraculously, the soldiers guarding him consented, but threatened him with sudden death if he did not return. Elimelech did not. As soon as the group marched from view, he ran to a nearby shack and hid under some hay. Immediately upon entering, he heard ferocious barking from a dog that was wandering nearby. Moments later, he heard two soldiers. Where is the Jewish swine? He must be hiding in the shack. All of a sudden, the dog began to howl thunderously. He couldn't be in there. The dog would have eaten him alive. Let's shoot the dog and enter the shack, said the first soldier. The other soldier turned in disbelief. Have you no compassion? Why will you shoot the poor dog? He never did anything to you. With that, the soldiers left the shack, and Elimelech was eventually rescued by a British platoon. That says it all. Says it all. The most cultured society can turn into a society that fully believes, have compassion on a dog, but hunt down a Jew like he's a swine, like he's a wild animal. The only way that there's a guarantee that we will truly live like decent human beings if we do that because Hashem commanded us to be that way and to follow the mitzvahs that he gave us. We do them with feelings of compassion, but the basis of doing it is because Hashem told us to do it. And when we do it because of that, we are guaranteed to truly remain decent human beings. Have a great night. Thank you for listening.